I think this is an amazing film and really interesting. I think it's politically bullshit.
Oh, yes, of course, because there's a bunch of closed-minded racist morons that represent people in the seats of power.
So this is part of that conversation of like the imagined American working class that we've been doing for decades now.
These are Bollywood musicals. They just don't have dance numbers because Hollywood doesn't have the balls to just, put in a dance number. And if you can direct an action sequence, you can direct a dance sequence.
It's 5 fucking stars. It's absolutely unbelievably beautiful and amazing. And it is total propaganda for the Cuban Revolution. I don't think anymore that you can avoid fighting inside and outside of the state at the same time. I think there may be multiple ways to do that. I don't think electoral politics is the only way to do that.
Yeah, but some shit's got to get burned down too, so...
Right.
Honestly, it kind of warms my heart that somebody out there was thinking that The Watermelon Woman was a threat to, white, hetero, cis, Christian culture.
I know we're saying that this isn't technically like a good movie, but a movie with surprisingly good elements and a really fucked up package.
This ending, you have good characters that are entirely powerless against the unstoppable evil capitalists.
Mm-hmm. Only after Avengers did Marvel movies start doing as well as Ghost.
Right.
Starring Patrick Swayze, Demi Moore, and some very phallic clay.
Did the word pornography ever enter your mind when you were watching this film, Isaac?
Nope.
And I think it has the Politics of Cinema stamp of approval. If you want to use this as a first date movie, go for it.
It seemed to have worked out for my folks. Fuck capitalism. Fuck all of this stuff.
Welcome all to the Politics of Cinema. On this show, we believe films are never neutral. There's a political as well as an artistic message captured in every film, in every country, in every time period, and we're on the lookout for all of it. My name is Aaron Spears.
And my name is Isaac Miller. And on this episode, we're looking at Summertime from 2020, directed by Carlos Lopez Estrada. So this is our 4th episode for our summer series on urban America in film. This is our second LA movie.
That's true. A recap just for people that are just dropping in for the first time. We did Falling Down from 93, the other LA movie. City of Hope, the John Sayles film from 91. Then we traveled back in time for the Michael Romer, The Plot Against Harry, which is about as New York as you can get. And now we're back out west.
And so if we're going to compare this to our first LA movie, which is our first movie, this could be not more different, both in form, but also in tone and view of the city, because this is a movie in love with LA and all of its diversity and difference, as well as not harshly, but also one, deeply aware of, the city's, basically of gentrification and racism and sexism and, deep class exploitation and so forth. But it's a total shift from everything we've done before. In some ways, we've had movies, the last 2 movies have been at least in part about white ethnics, not exclusively. And this is a movie that's not about that at all. And for one thing, it's a modern movie, right? We're not dealing with the restructuring of cities through the first half of the 20th century. We're in modern LA.
Well, there's some other interesting restructuring that's going on that we'll get into within LA specifically. But for folks that have not seen Summertime, I would actually venture to guess there's a good number of people that have never heard of this film, Summertime. It's Carlos Lopez Estrada as the director. Like we mentioned, it was I called it his follow-up to Blind Spotting, which is definitely a movie we will be discussing at some point in the life of the show. He also directed Raya and the Last Dragon, the animated film in there. I think that was technically his second film. But pandemic and release schedules screwed up all kinds of different things. The plot for this movie, I took this right from their press kit. Over the course of a hot summer day in Los Angeles, the lives of 25 young Angelinos intersect. A skating guitarist, a tagger, 2 wannabe rappers, an exasperated fast food worker, a limo driver. They all weave in and out of each other's stories. Through poetry, they express life, love, heartache, family, home, fear, etc. One of them just wants to find some place that still serves good cheeseburgers.
Ladies and gentlemen, we've got the legendary Anubis and Ra.
There's no one here, Ra. It's just us.
Have you forgotten where we are? What kind of crazy, dope magic happens in this city every day?
$15. In this economy, do you know what I can buy with $15?
No, no, no. Hell no.
Why are you here?
Because this city needs me.
There's literally a street that has stars in it with people's names.
$15 to get me a new outfit from the 4-star veteran thrift store down the street. I can make chicken Alfredo for dinner for $14.70. Purchase shampoo, conditioner, and leave-in for Marshalls at around $13.40. Lift home for $6.89. Climb into my night clothes, flop on my bed, open on my laptop, log on to Yelp, and write how ridiculous these prices are!
Whew.
I find that last line really comical, and you could kind of dismiss it outrightly because like it's kind of a joke end to a plot synopsis. But if you're familiar with the film Blindspotting, one of the big laments that Rafael Castell's character in that movie has is that the Around the Way burger chain has changed, and he doesn't like the way that they've changed their burgers at all, which is actually a punchline, a joke within several scenes in that particular movie as well. So I don't know what Carlos's attitude towards LA cheeseburgers are, but it seems like he has an opinion. He's put it in 2 of his movies so far.
Well, I mean, so Blind Spotting is not about LA, right?
No, Oakland.
It's Blind Spotting is about Oakland, and Blind Spotting, just to say, you know, we for the entire life of this podcast have meant to do a series on the cluster of incredible, basically consistently masterwork level Bay Area movies that came out over the last few years. You know, Sorry to Bother You,
Last Black Man in San Francisco, yeah. Fruitvale Station. I mean, it goes back a ways. The Kicks. Yeah, there's a lot in there.
There's a lot in there. And, you know, this would be, Blind Spotting would be a major part of it. I think it's a masterpiece, like a straight up masterpiece. But this movie, I mean, I was sort of describing it to you earlier, is basically a poetry musical.
Yeah. Oh, end of description.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's, I honestly, I mean, I think it's no, that's not all it is, but I think in form, it's a poetry musical.
It is.
Can you think of another movie that does that? There has to be someone else.
Well, I mean, there's like Saul Williams did Slam, but it's kind of a different approach to poetry musicals. But I mean, it's about like, you know, slam poetry competitions. And I mean, I don't know. Could you argue? I mean, I have a very liberal, as I've mentioned on the show before, I have a very liberal definition of musicals. So like this falls into my definition of musical, but like, is any kind of hip hop musical a poetry musical? So like, does Straight Outta Compton count? Does 8 Mile count? Does Belly count? I mean, not in the same way that he's doing it here. I mean, I know you're going to sigh here, Isaac, but like this is taking, poetry musical approach and putting it right on top of the structure of Richard Linklater's Slacker, but making it a wholly uniquely LA experience throughout.
Right. So, no, I think it's something, I mean, part of it is, yes, hip hop, you can say hip hop is poetry, and there is hip hop in this movie, but no, most of this is just, if I feel, is straight poetry, right? And some songs, like
right, but more emphasis on the poetry. So I mean, I don't know, like Shakespeare adaptations. I don't know.
I mean, it's more like a classic. Well, yeah, maybe, but those are plays in poetic language, and it is poetry. No, I don't think. I mean, part of it is this takes the poetic. I mean, this takes the musical form while they're doing the poetry. In that people, you know, it's like musicals are movies where people burst into song. You don't have to have an in-movie reason for them to do it, right?
Right.
I mean, that's the difference between a movie about slam poetry, right? Well, there's a lot of music, and you can call that a musical, but it's not the classical form of a musical. And this is straight up that. Like, people are just, you know, expressing themselves through suddenly just doing poetry. And
they burst. Yeah, you're right. They burst into poem the way some people burst into songs.
Yeah, and I think that's really cool.
It is really cool. Well, let's do a little bit of how it was made for folks too before we dive into it, because I think it's kind of there's an interesting backstory into the production as well. So this was obviously produced pre the pandemic kicking off, and what happened was Carlos Lopez Estrada was in LA, and he went to, I don't remember what got him to it in the first place, but he goes to like this poetry recital, and it was through this group called Get Lit. Get Lit Words Ignite. And it's a group of young Angelinos, poets, but I think there's like an age cap there. Like they were all like under like 22 or something, or 25. So like it's all like young, hungry, wildly talented poets. And he was just like blown away by this community, by their performance, by the support they had as they were all performing. And so it ended up becoming this thing where he was just like so taken aback by it. He's like, I got to investigate this. I got to start hanging out. I got to talk to these artists here. And so he ended up developing the script with 25 of them, a mere 25. And essentially, I think if you look at the cast list, it's a little confusing because it's not very well documented in the press notes or the press kit or the or IMDb of who's who. But basically, everybody's adapted. Their first name is their name in the movie. But so they're doing stuff that they wrote. So if you look at the writing credits on this, you're just scrolling for days because there's like 26 or 7 different people that are credited as writers. Because if you're seeing someone on camera speaking their poetry, and there were a few poets that were actually cut out that their scenes didn't make it into the movie, those are their words. Like that's their poem. Those are their words. And I love it because it has such a there's such specific character flavors here and such unique voices that I don't know. I just found it invigorating. The problem then, not the problem, but the hurdle you have as a filmmaker, which he had, was how do you tie all this together? Like visually, you can do that the way we talked about with City of Hope, the John Sayles film. It's a sprawling landscape of all these different multi-character dramatic arcs going on. And some characters will pass each other on the street and not even realize that they are intertwined, but the camera tells you it is because you're following character A and then character B walks by and then you start following character B. So those characters are attached the way we're watching the movie, even though they don't even know each other in the plot. And that's kind of that's what we have here, which is also how Slackers put together. But he also, Carlos Lopez Estrada, mentioned specifically one of his inspirations in this movie too, very heavy one, is Do the Right Thing, Spike Lee's masterpiece.
Yeah.
And that really clicked for me because basically this is all set over one day. We'll get into some of the structure for that in a minute. One day in Los Angeles from sunrise to sundown and a little bit of the evening, which again, like that's Do the Right Thing, right? One day, one hot summer day in New York City.
And part of it is like there's a suspension of time and reality a little bit.
There is.
Because it's one day, except that some people have entire music careers in that time.
Right.
In which everybody suddenly knows who they are.
Yeah.
And, whatever, which doesn't matter, right? Like
it doesn't. Yeah. You just got to go with it.
Yeah, that's perfectly fine. We also live in a world where people communicate through poetry.
Oh, so one of the things I think that really spoke to Mr. Estrada a little bit, I think we were talking about Blind Spotting. If you haven't seen Blind Spotting, I'm going to do a little bit of a spoiler here, so skip ahead like 30 seconds. But the end of Blind Spotting is like, it's a hip hop rap, it's a poetry monologue that Daveed Diggs gives to the cop, right? And they rap back and forth. He and Rafael Casal, his co-star and best friend in the movie, like they just kind of fuck with some rhymes while they're driving around the moving truck. But that ending is a poetry climax in Blind Spotting. So I think he has an attraction to the power of poetry and words and song in an interesting way. So I think that probably is what also piqued his interest when he went and saw this Get Lit performance and was like, oh shit, like he's interested in how words can be music or words can act as poetry and kind of open up. I don't know. I don't want to speak for him, but like it's a through line between two of his live action movies so far.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense.
So true collaborative work of art here is what we're saying with Summertime. This isn't like some unique auteur, like it's my words and it's my camera and it's my direction and it's my editing. Like this is a huge collaborative project that I think wraps up together as a whole, just brilliantly and fully satisfying to me.
And it does not to me. So this is, I mean, we sort of differ.
Is this your, the way I was with the Plot Against Harry? Is this your Plot Against Harry where you're like, yeah, I appreciate all of that. It just didn't work for me?
I think it really is similar to that. I think basically for me, I wish that I could point to some structural problem with all this. There probably is. And if I was better at this, why are you listening to this podcast? I would be able to kind of pick it out. But the truth of it is that the tone to me is very saccharine. Saccharine meaning excessively sweet or sentimental. It's just, which is interesting because it's a movie which does not shy away from all these characters everyone here has deep problems that in some way or another, I think most of them, not all of them, relate in some way to sort of structural oppression or class exploitation. I mean, this is sort of it's a gentrifying LA. at the same time, it avoids really having a political point about that, because ultimately everybody's satisfied by looking at the beauty of the city. One rant to an asshole who a misogynistic asshole, which I'm sure we'll talk about, and finding a cheeseburger and being with your friends, and all that's very real. But it's sort of, whereas like Blind Spotting is very much about dealing with those structural things. To me, they're sort of both far too inconspicuous to be in the background and yet not really dealt with. And I actually, I'm going to say, like, I to a certain degree, there are arcs that are full and there are arcs that are not. I mean, I don't think that's really important, but the saccharineness, that sort of the sweet sentimentality of it, I don't feel like I basically don't think the tone totally works for me. I don't have a problem with optimism, and I don't actually have a problem with excess sweetness. It doesn't land for me. I like everything that he's trying to do. I don't know if I like all of the poetry. I'm not sure all of the numbers land. I don't think all of them are of equal quality in terms. So some of it is a little, you're like, oh, but it's but I really appreciate this as stretching the form of the musical and really going for it. I just don't think it totally works for me.
Your reaction to what you're saying is like the saccharine nature of it. I think I responded to differently because of when I watched it.
Mm-hmm.
So you know what I mean? Like we talked a lot about, like, you watched The Plot Against Harry with someone else. I watched it on my own. So like your sense of humor was heightened because you were watching it with somebody else who was really digging it as well. And we were saying, yeah, if you watch this with a group of people, like comedies are different when it's with a group of people versus just yourself. So I did watch Summertime by myself, but I watched it because it was playing during the Cleveland International Film Festival 2021 edition, which was all streaming. And I was watching Summertime in an era where the movies were starting to come out that like included comments on the pandemic itself, or like there were characters wearing masks, or there were science fiction movies that were playing on the film festival circuit that were dealing with this and in real time. And I was like, I don't want to deal with this. I want some escape from this. And so when I watched Summertime, it played like a fantasy film to me because it was a time in March 2021 when like some vaccines were starting to roll out, but there was no semblance of life as normal going on whatsoever. And in this movie, you've got this bustling, sun-drenched city with all these colors and all these different characters and all these different friends, and they're bumping into each other and they're hanging out and they're doing a limo ride. And like it was all this stuff where I was like, fuck, I can't do any of this stuff right now. And so it really hit me as a fantasy film when I was watching it, because I was like, oh, I can't just like bump into my friend on the bus when we're like going to, a thrift store and then they talk into going out and get burgers, or, like none of that hangout nature was like possible at the time. So I think I was more in a headspace where like, I was like, oh yes, bring it on. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, this is a movie about the joys and frustrations of urban life. And yeah, in the middle, seeing it when you did, right? Yeah.
Right. And when urban life is completely shut down, you're like, oh my God, this is a fantasy about what life used to be like.
Right. That I would desperately like to be part of.
Which also actually bleeds right into the opening scene. Like it opens with a poem to set the tone of like, here's what you're all are in for, right? And it's this ode to the city poem.
This morning, the sewer water smelled like butterscotch, and I found a beetle flattened into the concrete of Koreatown. Scooter versus Scarab, squashed skid marks, shattering emerald green. And on the escalator leading down to the 7th Street Metro, pigeons paint the handrails, splattering off-white. Flops, lost, in the underground ecosystem of delayed train traffic and disappearances. But my sure step says, not me, not today. And my sure step says, sure, you can ask me for directions. It's true, I do know my way around this Angel Inks town, all its ins and outs and in and outs, all the creatures hidden in crevices, gone, off track. And when your phone map fails to find home, Wait for the bus by a grate that pushes up a hell of hot green-gray air. You're already there, having a Marilyn Monroe moment with the exquisite stink spurting from the sidewalk's underbelly. And the truth is, the Silver Line is my favorite sweat brigade, but when the rush hour crowd is too much, I turn the music up. Los Angeles, I am not lonely with you, my love. The wires cutting through the smog wrap themselves around my skittish heart till I am electrocuted by your current, stargazing on the boulevard beneath a pair of tangled sneakers, watching all the winged dreams around me scribble footnotes in our city's story.
That, I think, looking back to the first film we did, Falling Down, where did that movie end? On a pier in LA.
I mean, there's one of the most important common spaces in,
LA.
In LA, yeah. Like, I mean, this is it's Venice, and I think it's Venice, right?
I think so, yeah. I mean, I don't know. It's not like the exact same pier, but like we get the ending of Falling Down, a very different movie, tone, politics, everything else, and now this one starts off on the pier and then takes you into the city with this great poem that just sort of sets the tone. And if you're sitting there going, "What the fuck is this?" Like, well, this may not be the movie for you because there's going to be a lot more poetry coming your way.
I mean, this is a movie that comes from the perspective of largely young people, majority people of color, like California, like LA, and largely not exclusively like working class, sometimes of immigrant backgrounds. And Falling Down is about the absolute terror of all of that. So the joy of the pier that, but actually, here's the one thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he, in Falling Down, our main character finds, what is it, the ice cream shop or something has been replaced by some new
You're right.
bullshit.
Yeah.
In this whole movie, a lot of this is about, the opening scenes especially are about gentrification. And then there's clear signs of gentrification everywhere that aren't really always reflected on because it's just what LA looks like right now.
Yeah.
But like the opening, the overpriced toast replacing your family burger place.
Right.
That's what's there. So like, I don't know.
Well, so that's an interesting. So there's a couple of the characters I wanted to focus on as we talk through it, because otherwise, like we'd be talking through 25 characters, forget about it. But that's Tyrus.
Yeah,
he's doing like Yelp reviews and video commentary. So he's the one that you mentioned at the restaurant scene here, where like my local burger joint has changed, and now it's this like avocado toast, like couldn't be more LA, trendy, right, kind of thing. As we follow him through, I find his character arc kind of interesting because he's also got a couple friends, and it seems like his friend group is breaking up. So he's got some thoughts on it there, but his frustration seems to be transferred into like complaining about all like the restaurants that have changed. So it's really his search, like as we said at the kind of the joke at the end of the synopsis was like, the search for a good old fashioned cheeseburger. He comments on there's even like a boutique shop that used to be like a thrift store that he liked or something. Like it is this commentary as he goes through LA of like what's all changing. And he doesn't really like it. But then at one point he's pulled into he's drawn into this local Korean restaurant that's family owned that he's never been in before, but the music is speaks to him. So he's like, "What is this music?" And so he wanders in and he was like, "Oh my gosh, how long have you guys been here?" And the cashier, one of the women, is like, 4 generations. And I was like, I don't know. It was just, it's not all like just neat, tidy, easy commentary on, a gentrifying neighborhood or something. That's like, couldn't be more of a local, like, neighborhood place that he was just unaware of, or probably walked by 100 times and just never gave it a thought because nothing was drawing him in. And now, because they're playing, a younger employee, a younger daughter and granddaughter is playing more modern music, he's like, "Oh, what's going on in here?"
Well, and that's a whole scene with its own themes and stuff about intergenerational whatever,
right.
Which I think I mean that's interesting. I mean, part of it is that there's the overarching commentary on changing the cities that you see through him, but also what's going on, and he explains this in his poem. His friend group isn't breaking up, but they're not willing to follow him around.
Well, no, one of his friends is like heading off to college or something.
Oh, right. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So they are breaking.
So the dynamic is going to be different. Like they're not all leaving, but like one of them's leaving, it's going to be different. So, but they're not around. He's kind of on his own this day.
He ends up on his own because he's on this obsessive quest, and they're like worrying about him. And there's a scene where they both text him saying, "You can stay at our house. Like, where are you?"
Mm-hmm.
But basically, what it is that he doesn't have a home really because. But basically, I mean, what his poem is about is the fact that what home is a very complicated thing because he's been kicked out of his house for being gay, out of his family house, and his origin family's house.
Home is in the hearts of those who welcome me. In the cushions of their couches, home is in memory. Hand-me-down sneakers kissing the asphalt, the beam of the streetlights. Home is everything I miss. My baby brother's hugs, a bed. Before I was kept away from both of them, home is in distance, and the feelings I found to bridge back the association in gold nail polish, and the burger joint that tasted like my mother's cooking. Before she cut me from her bloodline in a dinner table. Home is the morning I left, when I clipped the streetlights to the soles of my shoes and strode against the skyline taking its first breaths. Home is the thrifted clothes I used to cover the marks given after birth. On my arm from my mother, my back from my sister, my collarbone, my father. Home is all the things I could carry. Everything I couldn't. For even the memories were too heavy. All my art, Christmas letters, awards, baby pictures, all the places I could no longer visit. Home. It's in the silence of my friends asking if I'm okay. Home is the traits I would not claim beyond its front doors unless no one was around to hear it. My switch, the bend of my wrist, all dismissed at the doorstep. Home to love. To lose. To lose love for loving wrong. Home where not a cop or God was present, where I called for both and neither one answered.
And so part of it is looking for the burger, looking for a good old-fashioned burger is part of the desperate attempt for stability.
Sure.
Time. And to latch onto some part of his childhood, which now has sort of been taken from him in the sense of in terms of memory, in terms of undispersed memory, I guess.
Yeah.
Does that seem?
No, you're right. And then it's on top of that, what's so bittersweet is one, it's a kick-ass poem, and he's clearly like he's communicating like this deep like like emotional aches that he has, and then so he records this video, and then what does he do when he's done recording the video? He goes into his video, his camera roll on his phone, and he deletes it. Like this great, powerful, just like open heart, expression of what he's really feeling, and then just deletes it. Meanwhile, like everything else that he keeps posting and he makes very public is, his rants and raves about, the restaurants and his trek through LA this day. So like the most meaningful thing that he actually records or could communicate that day, he deletes because it to him like is either too raw or doesn't have value or he doesn't want it out or whatever. But man, when he hit that delete button, I was just like, oh, tires. Oh man, that hurts.
I mean, I think it's the best arc in the movie, and he's, he can't put that outside for his outward shell, which is sort of cracking. Because his friends can tell something is wrong because of the cheeseburger quest.
Right. Yeah. Even as one of his close friends, there's like two close friends. One of them even says like, look, you're my best friend. Like, I'm here for you. Like, are you okay? Like, they're very caring, concerned friends. So like he has a good support system there for himself. But I don't know. I just felt that like it was such like a nice, like kind of like bittersweet touch to give the audience is privy to such private information that not even his closest friends are privy to. I don't know. It's a good little like character trait there.
They must know his basic story because they would have been there for that.
Right.
But they don't know how he feels.
But it's that difference that split between like he lives so much in public, on social media, and then but holds like these certain private things that are actually like deeply meaningful and beautiful.
Yeah.
I mean the poem, not the hurt he was feeling. The poem is what I meant was beautiful.
I think it really is the tension between the structural changes and oppression and so forth in the city and the very personal, sometimes not very LA specific issues that a lot of the people have.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the things that it just doesn't feel coherent to me. And I feel like the attempt at the end, basically a lot of our characters end up by a burger joint where multiple people quit, which is really funny considering it's before COVID and then before the great quitting that we've seen in the last few years, the wave of people quitting jobs, basically. But somebody getting tired of working at a burger place, which seems fair. And then our erstwhile rappers who have made it during the movie show up, say they just want to hang out in the burger place because it's a real place and you can have our limo for the night. And so all our characters, not all of them, but a large portion of our characters show up, and then people sort of complete their arcs, or we see them completing their arcs in montage if they're not there. But they're not really all, they don't have to all be tied together thematically, and we can probably find ways that they do. But I guess it's like we never really have a reckoning with how messy the city is. We just sort of end up with a love letter to it. And the love letter's fine. I just don't know how this all fits together in the end. It just doesn't feel totally coherent.
I mean, does it have to?
Well, that's a question, right? Sometimes this is what I'm having struggling with, is I don't always think it needs to be coherent. But in this case, it would help.
I mean, it's kind of a genre we've talked about kind of on the periphery a number of times on the podcast as like the hangout movie. You're just hanging out with these characters. Some annoy the shit out of me, like the podcaster duo. I'm like, okay, God, could you be any more like, LA trendies? But I was like, well, they have kind of their stories. It's kind of more as a couple like subset of characters for this one other main character. But, there's some stuff that like isn't necessarily my favorite. The hip hop duo, Anubis and Ra, I think are like, it's anytime they went to them, I was like, oh, it's time for some comic relief. They've got great chemistry. I don't necessarily care for their hip hop, but they do this whole like the sincerity that's lacking in hip hop and the lean towards like, bling and big rides and all this money or whatever. But yeah, like I don't think that they necessarily like all land, but I don't think they all have to land. I think if I could see this in a theater full of people, I think you'd hear or feel pockets of the theater like lighting up or reacting to stuff. They're like, oh, I didn't really connect to that, but like, oh, those people are definitely connected with this part right here. So I think it's more just, you're just hanging out with a cross section of people that is just generally overall, I think does push towards optimism and a love letter to a city and the diversity of a city or this particular city in general. But also like there's deep heartache and scars on display in this film.
Yeah, I know. And I think that's just it but part of it is like, part of what I was saying is that in some ways they don't all tie together with the city itself. So in some ways their stories don't feel like a tale of the city because they're not particularly particular to it, right? Like maybe a rapping therapist is a particularly LA thing. I don't know.
I want to come back to her at some point because like that's one of the tonal things that I think they just stuck the landing so hard with her with that through line on the narrative.
I actually think she works really well.
I think it's the biggest emotional payoff in the movie for me.
Oh wait, what, that couple?
No, the rapping therapist.
Oh, the rapping therapist.
Well, we'll get to that. Hey, just what were you saying there about it not really getting the city?
I'm struggling to say. I mean, I think the main thing actually is the tone is too saccharine and wraps up too nicely. And I actually like positive movies, but there's something about this that's just like, it's just too much. And it's because I've seen too many grim difficulties in this movie, and I don't feel like they're adequately actually dealt with. We're just ending up with like a love fest for the city, and everybody's okay. And it's like
they're not though.
Yeah, but they are, right? Like in the final montage, they are okay.
They're okay in that moment, but then like they all go home and they're going to be like on their own and not in a group anymore. And there's going to be like Markeisha's not going to be okay in the morning. Like she feels better, but like that's rough. That's scarring. She's going to be dealing with that for a long time.
But I don't think that's it. I don't think that's in the text of the movie.
Absolutely, it is. I mean, I think it is, but
yeah, but in
So-
the morning, the things will be different. Yeah, I don't think so.
I wanted to ask you a bit more. Like, when you kept saying like it's not representative, like of the city. Do you feel like this could take place in some other city and be the exact same movie?
I don't think it could visually, and I don't even think it could poetically. But I actually think what's happening to most of the people is not particularly specific. And I think if you think about our last few movies, maybe Falling Down could happen somewhere else, though a lot of it feels very LA.
I
The
think
two-
City of Hope could happen somewhere else too.
It could, but there's some very specific things to a small Jersey town.
Okay,
You
and
could
I think
have-
there's very specific LA things here too.
There are, but not to their arcs.
I think there are.
Like who?
You and I, if we were like Anubis and Ra, like the hip hop duo, like they're not going to get discovered if they're in like Akron, Ohio. They get discovered because there's a record producer because they're in LA.
I think Anubis and Ra are it, actually. Everybody else, which nothing wrong with that, right? Like these are the stories of people's actual lives, or they are realistic stories. They also, that's not completely true. The immigrant stories obviously could happen some other places, but they're part of the fabric of LA and what it is. And so those particular stories in which it ties into that. But I just feel like a lot of this sort of, especially the things that sort of come center, which is things having to do with either rejection or in romantic relationships and senses of insecurity, don't feel like a particularly LA thing. And I actually wish that it doubled down on the stuff that felt more
LA.
More LA. Yeah. It's like, why are we, it's like, why are we, I felt like that is, I mean, in some ways, Marquisha's story, which, just say, like dealing with rejection, as well done as that is in some ways, isn't specific. I'm trying to figure out why I don't like this, right? And without a rewatch, it's tricky because I like so much of it.
Maybe you're just having a hard time saying that you like it because generally you don't want to say you like saccharine things.
I like saccharine things.
I don't know why you don't like this either then. I mean, it's also a city I've never even been to. So I can't, like, to me, it feels very LA to me. And like the visuals are so baked in. Like there's even these great montages of all the different graffiti art that's around, I guess, sort of this neighborhood. I don't even know if it's like a certain section of LA, the way that, The Plot Against Harry was a very specific section of New York City, or Falling Down was a section of LA. But yeah, I don't know. Like the city itself just seemed very baked into me. I think one of the things in this particular movie, though, they're not saying the word LA a ton. I mean, they're saying it a lot, but like not in the way that's like would reinforce it in your brain as like, oh, this is LA, oh, this is LA, because they keep saying LA. There's this sense of home that a lot of these characters, if not all of them, are talking about or expressing in one way or another. I think they're saying home. There's even a poem in the middle of I mean, there's the start off that's Ode to the City. That's obviously all about LA. There was a poem that's this great montage towards the middle-ish of the movie that is all about just like the idea of home. It's before we get to the Tyrus when he does his recording of his idea of home. There's just this montage of people all around the city. I think it's maybe when they're transitioning more to nighttime. But it's like it's all shots of characters and people doing things in the city and in their neighborhoods and in their areas in LA, but saying this idea of home. And I don't know, it really, I don't know, visually and through the poem itself just really connected it to like, this is LA, this is home for these people.
No, I think the sense of place in terms of, I think what you're talking about is like very deeply baked in there, right?
Mm-hmm.
And is really powerful in it, I think, I mean, so part of it is I'm both saying that some of the arcs don't feel like they have enough place to them because the sense of place in the rest of the movie is so strong. And I don't know, I know that doesn't totally work, but it just, this is, I mean, if you look at the reviews for this movie, it's very divided. And I think for a reason, because it's just really uneven. And maybe it's just that not all of the poems work for me. And I'm sort of like, But no, I think that's just is like the sense of place is really strong. And it actually is a view of LA. We're used to seeing LA in movies a lot, right?
Yeah.
Not quite as much as New York, but pretty close.
Pretty close.
And I feel like in a certain sense, this sort of sense of like, I think this is a very unique, I've never seen it portrayed quite like this before. Part of it is, in a lot of ways, what we're seeing is lots of different pieces of art stitched together, right, as you pointed out. And maybe it just doesn't totally work for me. Like, maybe I just don't feel like the stitching works.
Sure.
And that's fine, because there's like instances. I mean, like I said, like, this is a really interesting experiment of a movie. And then also, I think a lot of them do work. And we've talked about some that do. We haven't talked about Markeisha's.
All right, well, let's do that right now then, because this one I didn't catch quite the emotional impact and the connective tissue this thread has through the movie on my what is this 2020 on my first, second, but I did now on my third watch of this movie. So one of the early scenes you have in this film is this couple, Anna and Walter, are going to their therapist, and as they're heading into they're sitting in the therapist's waiting room, and when the therapist says goodbye to Markeisha, who's leaving, who just ended her session, and she's like, I'm just not ready to, she's working on stuff, and there's clearly something going on there, but she's telling her therapist, I'm just not ready just yet. And it's a little vague, but we're like, okay, that may be a side character, because you're also early on in this movie, you're not really sure what characters you may end up following or visiting again, and which ones are just going to be like that one little exchange or something, right? And then so we have Anna and Walter in this, I think pretty comedic, couples counseling session, in which the end of it, their therapist is basically just pitching, like, here, read my book. Here, read. It just gives them a copy of her book, and her book is called How to Rap Battle Your Demons, which is inherently comical, right? Like, how to rap battle your demons as therapy book. How LA could that be? The whole like self-help industry that's, all around LA anyway. So it's like, okay, that's kind of a throwaway thing. You're like, that's an interesting tone of comedy. And then one of the other side stories, as we've already mentioned, is Anubis and Ra, who are this hip hop group who get discovered, cut an album, make it big, have a concert, get sick of fame. And actually, if you paid close enough attention to one of the marquees towards the end of the film, is Nubis and Ra, their reunion tour has already started. So like, that's violating all of the space and time rules, but who cares, because it's kind of fun. And I dig that part. But yes, this all happens in one day.
Yeah.
So, but in the background, of course, along the trajectory of their career is they have to film a music video. And we revisit Markeisha. She is in the park talking to one of her friends on the phone, talking about how, like, yeah, she went to see her therapist and she's still not feeling too good and what a shitty day it is. And she's like, get a load of this. My therapist wrote this book, How to Rap Battle Your Demons. Listen to this, and reads a little passage, and it's comical. She's like, oh my gosh, what is going on here? But it's all about, like, the passage she reads is funny, but it's about the power of words to express your emotion, to get that like out of you and get those demons out and express yourself with words. And then in the background, her friend's like, oh my God, is that Anubis and Ra? Oh, those rappers who love their mama. Hold the phone up. I want to hear some of this stuff.
Right.
And what this builds to is her payoff ends up being, she ends up at the burger joint, which is one of my favorite scenes in the movie. I know they're all kind of my favorites, but one of my favorite scenes of the movie is when this kid, Gordon, he gets promoted to cashier, then he gets promoted to manager, then he quits and gives everybody free cheeseburgers. And then he's the one who hops in the limo with a group that's there at the burger joint, and Markeisha is one of them.
Right.
And what ends up happening then is Markeisha does end up actually rap battling her demons in the most emotionally, like, the emotional climax of the film. She tells off her ex via poetry.
Well, he's not her ex.
Or sorry, she tells off, but I'm just saying she finally expresses herself and lets it out through poetry. She ends up in the climax rap battling her demons.
It was something in the way you walked. Something about the way you talked. It just did something to me. I mean, you didn't quite give me butterflies, more like fireflies. Because every time you smiled, I lit up. Until the day I told you I liked you. I just wanted to know if you liked me too. I just wanted to know if you were feeling what I was feeling inside. But instead, you thought it was a good day to make me cry, so you replied, I must be stupid or out of my mind. Maybe if I lost a little weight, then we could date, but maybe not. Because I still can't change my face. You said I'll always look like this, and I'm not exactly model status. I said, you told me you'd be there through any weather, and now it's pouring and storming, and you just ran off with my umbrella. You said I must have fell and bumped my head. You said I must be dreaming, but it felt more more like a nightmare. And I wasn't scared, just more hurt than anything. You said it might be better if I died. If I died and came back reincarnated as a beauty queen, because right now I'm not doing too good with this beauty thing. So I said, I pray and wish that I was made of lead so I can erase and start over like you said, but I'm not. So instead, I tried being dead. You were the reason for my third suicidal attempt and an attempt to come back different, but I'm already different. So to come back different for being different will mean to come back the same. And I said, it's strange. I heard people say everyone's different. You said, stop. Stop making excuses to be useless. You said the only reason people will be attracted to me is because of my breast, and in the back of my mind I'm thinking, makes sense. I mean, people have actually asked me my bra size before they asked me my name. So I said, I'm gonna start wearing hoodies to test this theory, to see if you can't see my chest, how many people would come near me. You said you'd be willing to bet your whole life savings on zero. You said, how many people do you know that want to be seen holding hands with the likes of you? Zero. I had a reply in the back of my mind, but I stayed silent. And the look I gave you was just so violent. You didn't know it, but I was trying to think of ways that I could kill you and get away with it. I wondered if I dipped your face in acid, how many of my pretty face, hot body friends would want to date you then. I wanted to beat you to where your own mother wouldn't be able to identify you. I wanted to show you what it felt like to be zero. Like you said, how many people do you know that want to be seen holding hands with you then? I would be willing to bet zero.
Awesome. Look at that arc.
I know it's good. I think it. No, I think it is good. So, the other part of it. I mean, she picks up one of our other characters along the way before they go to the burger place, which is actually one of the things that I think drags the movie, which is a character who has been dumped by her boyfriend and is stalking him until finally. Who he is a really obnoxious podcast guy. She stalks him until finally he figures it out and tells her, your insecurities are like basically destroying you. You don't need a boyfriend. You need a therapist.
Yeah.
Fair enough. And then her and Markeisha end up sitting on the bench together, and Markeisha like sort of talks her down and then says, let's go get a burger. That actually scene between them is a really good one that resonated, but I actually her entire story up until that point is kind of a drag on the movie. Like, I don't know why this needs to be happening. Like, there's some amusing cat and mouse, but she's also acting really heightened and weird, which doesn't totally fit almost. So, like, Markeisha's story actually, there we go. There's some fat on here that could have been cut away and streamlined. And if I could have just focused more on Markeisha's arc, I think that would have been better. Even though, once again, it's one of the ones I sort of like, it's not really LA specific. It's very specific, except for the therapist who is, yes, I agree. It's a really interesting combination of self-help and something that's very, that's.
Because she's got her own unique angle on therapy. So it can't just be another, like, it's a specific type. She's got her little, like, dog she's holding on the cover, but.
I mean, it's definitely one of the, some of my favorite scenes are with the rapping therapist. But yeah, no, I'm trying to figure out all the things. I'm not trying to beat up on the movie. It's actually that I'm trying to figure out the different angles of what bothers me, and it might literally just be tone.
I mean, I like it though too, because if you're reading like a book of poetry, like you're not going to have some narrative through line page by page by page by page. It's going to like hop around, and it's all about hitting different emotional beats. And if they're some of them are satisfying. Some of them you just turn the next page and you read the next one and you forget that poem on the previous page. And so maybe that poem will hit you differently the next time you read it. And I think it does a really skillful job of not just like feeling like you're channel surfing and like these jarring switches. Like, I feel like there's at best, there are like really smooth transitions that actually really tie the themes together, even across multiple scenes, which I think that a good example of that would be the full-on dance sequence we've got in the middle of this film.
So that is the scene where I figured out what this movie was, and that connected with me maybe the most, which sort of annoys me because it's the most conventional musical scene.
Well, sometimes you need those like Hallmark genre characteristics to grab onto and be like, oh, okay.
So, part of it is you've got a mother and daughter at a Mexican restaurant, really speaking Spanish, basically the daughter is just about to go to college. She's turned 18. She wants to go to a party. She's wearing red lipstick. And her mother is like freaking out about boys and how will you look, and basically, you know, all this sort of like gatekeeping of all this sort of like, you know, gatekeeping of patriarchy in a certain sense, right?
Well, because her mother even frames it at one point where like if you have on the red lipstick or you're wearing a red dress, like you're inviting it,
right?
Kind of thing. But it's also, you know, it's a concerned mom too. Like, you know, I get it.
It's a concerned mom. It's a generational thing.
Yeah.
Except every generation plays this out. And the daughter has a rap about sort of, I guess I'm trying to remember, but like self-expression.
Well, she talks about it's self-expression, but also like the history of there, but like, you know, what her grandma's life was like versus what her mom's life was like.
Right.
And in the middle of that, the waitress comes by and like pours some more water for them and gets a cat call from a passing car.
And so the waitress goes out into the street, has a musical number. I mean, she's wearing this dress that almost looks like it's out of West Side Story, and has a musical number with the car that's been harassing her, but with basically like an entire, you know, practical chorus line of women, except they're like a crowd, and they literally push the car away.
I'd say all in red dresses doing this like great bit of choreography. That's expertly edited, and it's a give and take, between like this, you know, big chorus line of women with red dresses on and a cat caller that, like you said, by the end of it, they just physically push the guy away.
Right. And it's great. And so that was the moment where I'm like, oh, it hit me. I was like, oh, this is a musical.
No, Isaac, here's how you say it. Oh, yes, this is a musical.
I mean, I like musicals. I'm not as big a musical person as you, but I definitely enjoy it. But no, it's the scene that really grabbed me, right?
Yeah.
I was like, oh, here I am, I'm in this. But I what I meant is it's in some ways the least characteristic one, because it's more of a conventional musical.
Sure.
So I'm sort of like, why is this what's catching me? What does this say about me? Maybe I don't like poetry. I think I like poetry.
Well, I mean, you could also just be like, I don't like all poetry. So like you said, some hit you, some don't hit you. I think it also just depends on possibly like it's one of those that I would even see it like changing if like I saw this when I was, you know, 18 years old, I'd feel different about it as I saw it now versus if I saw it when I'm like 55 or something. You know, it's going to be different.
Yeah.
And some of it's going to work and some of it isn't. Also because there's just so much in it as well. So some works, some doesn't.
Yeah, I mean, that's just it. It's like, I think it's some works, some doesn't. And, you know, you've got varied artists and varied, all sort of displaying their uniqueness and then trying to pull that all together.
Mm-hmm. And I should say too, the way that we mentioned the poets and the artists that Mr. Estrada is working with here also they're not all trained actors either. Like just because you can do a great poetry performance in a live performance space or setting doesn't necessarily translate to like it's going to 100% work on the camera. I think for the most part it does throughout this whole film, but you know I could see that like some hits harder emotionally to me because it also connects, even if the acting maybe is a little bit stiffer or not quite there with every single performer.
Yeah.
So,
some work better than others, but the overall sum is really interesting.
I say the overall sum is brilliant and I love it. And I'm going to watch it every summer because it makes me happy.
You should do that.
I have been. This is my third watch.
Is this your third? I thought you were second. Shoot.
Well, I cheated because I watched it spring 2021 when we watched it for the festival, and then I watched it later when it came out, and then I watched it again a couple of days ago. So okay. It's part of my summer rotation from here on out. But all right, it's interesting how we flip flopped on movies week to week here, Isaac. With The Plot Against Harry was my like interesting, but I'm not really on board with it, and you're saying pretty much the same thing for this one.
Yeah, so it is interesting. I think you were actually less harsh on The Plot Against Harry than I was from this. But
I feel like on this one, some of your tone was harsh, but everything that you were saying mostly was pretty positive. Or maybe you thought your tone was harsher. I don't know. But anyway, we don't have a specific film for our next episode, Isaac, but we wanted to wrap up our little sort of summer mini series here on American urban landscapes. So what are we planning for next episode?
Well, I think we're gonna do another double feature episode where we take different movies, which we have not covered, that sort of display America, sort of American cities, which is a very, very wide theme, right? And then we're going to see if we can come up with a decent double feature.
Yeah.
In some way, we don't have a thematic through line. We've had some that have played throughout these movies, and then some that haven't.
I like it. It's a bit more amorphous and allowed us to kind of play around and pick out some interesting films.
Right.
That said, I do have a couple parameters because, like we said at the top of the show, or somewhere at some point during the show, we've done basically 2 East Coast and 2 2 specific LA films, and we did a non-named New Jersey film in City of Hope, and we did a New York city film with The Plot Against Harry. So I'm kind of trying to do my best to maybe not revisit those cities because there's a lot of other urban landscapes within America that I kind of want to explore or at least take a look at with film. I may completely violate that rule. Depends on what I pick, but I've got a list of about 14 or 15 films right now I got to narrow down and see what we come up with for some other urban landscapes possibly here.
This has been a total existential crisis for me trying to put together this list. It's real hard because there's too many good LA and New York movies. And
I mean, pick them then. That's fine. Maybe keeping a focus only on those 2 cities would be the way to go. I don't know.
No, we're not. We're not. I mean, I wanted to get off the coast, but I'm not really pulling that off particularly well. I mean, you could, right? Like, I think more work could be done, and you could, but I'm probably not going to do that because there are movies that I want to do. We'll see. I'm going to try.
Yeah, we'll see what happens.
I'm gonna really try.
All right. Well, Isaac is trying. I will politely remind everybody that as we sign off here, be sure to rate and review the show in whatever podcast app you are using. And if you do enjoy the show, tell a friend or 2 or 3 or all of them. We're also up and running on the usual social media, blah, blah, blahs. It's all in the show notes if you want to give us a follow or keep an eye on what we're posting there. And until next time, I am Aaron.
And I am Isaac. And we're still on an ongoing bit of a strike wave, and I feel like it's going to heat up a lot. And the boss is going to be trying to screw you over, and they're going to be firing a lot of union organizing workers. We've been seeing this a lot at Starbucks, and then we'll see about UPS because the boss doesn't care if you die and global warming is happening and you don't have air conditioning in your vehicles. So I think people should stay safe on the picket line. That's always the case, but drink enough water, watch out for cars, both hostile and just accidental, and watch out for company goons like it's the 19th or early 20th century, or first half of the 20th century, or later. Yeah, I think for me that's like the big safety tip on my mind. These are not supposed to be safety tips, but
needs to be said.
Yes, exactly.